The acquisition meeting was supposed to be routine until Derek, my boss's nephew and newly appointed VP, stood up mid presentation and pointed directly at me. Take a week and disappear quietly, he announced to the room of 12 executives like I was some intern who'd spilled coffee. The buyer's CEO, Mr. Harrison, raised an eyebrow. I didn't argue or defend myself. Instead, I reached into my briefcase, pulled out my business card, and slid it across the polished mahogany table. Harrison read it, looked up at me with surprise, then slowly turned to my boss. The silence in that conference room felt thick enough to cut with a knife. Harrison's fingers traced the edge of my business card before slipping it into his jacket pocket without a word. His expression remained unreadable, but something had shifted in his posture. The meeting stumbled forward awkwardly as Derek attempted to resume his presentation about post-acquisition staffing optimization, but the energy had completely changed. I gathered my materials with steady hands, refusing to let anyone see how my heart was pounding. 5 years I had dedicated to Pinnacle Solutions, building their digital marketing department from absolutely nothing into a revenue-generating powerhouse that increased company profits by 300%. When I started here, they didn't even have a proper website. Now we managed 43 major client accounts worth over $12 million annually. Derek had arrived 6 months ago fresh from Northwestern's Kellogg School of Management with his MBA and zero real-world experience. Within 2 weeks of his arrival, my boss, Richard Pinnacle, had promoted his nephew to Vice President of Strategic Development. The title meant nothing concrete, but Derek wielded it like a weapon, inserting himself into every department meeting and decision-making process. I remembered the exact moment things began changing. It was a Tuesday morning in March when Richard started excluding me from executive planning sessions. Derek's handling the strategic overview now, he'd said, avoiding my eyes. You focus on the day-to-day client management. The dismissal stung because those strategic sessions had been my idea in the first place. This acquisition by TechFlow Industries was supposed to be the culmination of everything I'd built. $42 million for a company that had been worth maybe $8 million when I joined. My digital transformation strategies, client retention programs, and innovative social media campaigns had created the value that made Pinnacle attractive to buyers in the first place. But somewhere along the way, I'd been written out of the narrative entirely. Derek's presentation credited himself with developing our client acquisition strategies and implementing the automation systems that I had researched, proposed, and overseen for 18 months. He spoke about his vision for digital marketing integration while I sat there knowing every flowchart and algorithm had come from my late nights and weekend research. The humiliation of being dismissed in front of TechFlow's executive team felt like a physical blow. These were industry leaders I'd hoped to work with, people whose respect I'd wanted to earn. Instead, Derek had painted me as dead weight to be discarded before the ink dried on the acquisition papers. I drove home in my Honda Accord through the familiar streets of downtown Phoenix, processing the betrayal with each mile. Richard had been like a father figure when I started at Pinnacle. He'd trusted me with major client presentations, praised my innovative thinking in company-wide emails, and once told me I had the sharpest business mind he'd encountered in 20 years of entrepreneurship. How many family dinners had I missed to meet his deadlines? How many relationships had I neglected to prioritize? Pinnacle's growth. My sister still reminded me about missing her wedding rehearsal dinner because of an emergency client crisis that couldn't wait until morning. My phone buzzed with a text from Jenny Martinez, my assistant, and the one person at Pinnacle who'd remained genuinely loyal. Shari, you need to know something. Derek spent an hour in your office after you left. He was taking photos of your strategy boards and going through your filing cabinets. I tried to stop him, but he said Mr. Pinnacle authorized it. The betrayal cut deeper with each revelation. I trusted these people with my career, my reputation, and my future. Now they were systematically erasing my contributions while preparing to profit from everything I'd built. I pulled into my apartment complex as rain began spattering against my windshield. The weather matched my mood perfectly, but as I sat in my car watching droplets race down the glass, something inside me hardened into resolve. Derek might have won this battle, but he had no idea what he'd actually started. The next morning, I arrived at Pinnacle Solutions at 7:30, my usual time, to find Derek already sitting behind my desk. My desk. He'd moved my family photos to a cardboard box on the floor and was scrolling through my computer screen, examining client files that contained 5 years of relationship building and strategic planning. Morning, Shari, he said without looking up, his tone casual, as if this was completely normal. Just streamlining operations before the acquisition finalizes, you understand. The smirk on his face told me everything I needed to know about how much he was enjoying this moment. Those are confidential client files, I said, keeping my voice level despite the fury building in my chest. You need authorization from legal to access them. Derek finally looked up, his expression shifting to mock concern. Oh, but I do have authorization. See, there have been some performance issues we need to document properly. He opened a manila folder and slid it across the desk toward me. Client complaints, missed deadlines, unprofessional conduct. It's all here. I picked up the folder with trembling hands and opened it to find a performance review I had never seen before, dated 3 months ago and signed by Richard. According to this document, Henderson Manufacturing had complained about my inappropriate familiarity during business dinners. Coastal Dynamics had allegedly questioned my understanding of industry standards. Meridian Tech supposedly requested a more senior point of contact for their account. Every single allegation was completely fabricated. I'd maintained professional relationships with all these clients for years. Henderson's CEO, Thomas Walker, had personally recommended me for a Marketing Excellence Award just 6 months ago. Coastal Dynamics had renewed their contract early, specifically to lock in my services. Meridian Tech's president had my personal cell phone number because he valued my accessibility. This is fiction, I said, closing the folder and setting it down carefully. None of these complaints exist. Documentation says otherwise. Derek's voice carried a note of triumph. Richard's been tracking your declining performance for months. The acquisition team needs to understand why certain personnel changes are necessary. I stared at him, realizing this wasn't opportunistic betrayal. This was systematic destruction planned and executed over months, while I'd been completely oblivious. How many other incidents could be reframed with false context? How many conversations had been twisted into evidence against me? I need to make some calls, I said, turning toward the door. Actually, your phone access has been temporarily restricted, Derek called after me. Security protocols during the transition, I'm sure you understand. I drove straight to Morrison and Associates, where my mentor Patricia Williams had landed after leaving Pinnacle 2 years ago. Patricia had been Richard's marketing director before me, and she'd helped train me during my first months at the company. If anyone could help me make sense of what was happening, it would be her. Patricia's office overlooked Scottsdale's financial district, a corner space that reflected her success in the competitive consulting world. She listened to my story with growing alarm, occasionally interrupting to ask for clarification about dates and specific incidents. Shari, this is worse than you realize, she said, finally leaning back in her leather chair. Derek contacted me 3 weeks ago, supposedly on Richard's behalf. He wanted to discuss transitioning client relationships and ask detailed questions about your management style. He specifically mentioned concerns about your ability to handle the pressure of an acquisition. My stomach dropped. What did you tell him? Nothing useful, thankfully. I defended your work and told him any company would be lucky to have you. But he kept pushing for information about potential weaknesses or areas where you might be struggling. Patricia opened her laptop and pulled up an email. Look at this. He sent me a follow-up asking if I'd noticed any signs of instability or unprofessional behavior during our time working together. The email was dated just 2 weeks ago. Derek had been building a case against me while pretending to mentor me through the acquisition process. Every friendly conversation, every piece of advice I'd sought about handling the transition had been ammunition for my own destruction. There's something else, Patricia continued, her expression growing more serious. I've heard rumors that Derek's been reaching out to some of your major clients, informal conversations about policy changes and transition planning. He's positioning himself as their primary contact moving forward. He can't do that without authorization from Richard. Can't he? You said Richard's been excluding you from strategic meetings. What if Derek convinced him that client relationship management needed to be centralized under his supervision? I felt sick. My client relationships represented years of trust building, late night problem solving, and genuine partnership. These weren't just business contacts, they were professional friendships built on mutual respect and proven results. Derek was systematically inserting himself into relationships he hadn't earned while preparing to cast me as incompetent. I need to see the original contracts and communication records. I said, my mind racing through possibilities. Be careful, Shari. If Derek's been planning this for months, he's probably covered his tracks pretty thoroughly. You need more than suspicion to fight this kind of systematic campaign. I spent the rest of the day researching TechFlow Industries and CEO Harrison's background. What I discovered gave me the first glimmer of hope I'd felt in weeks. Harrison had built TechFlow on principles of ethical business practices and employee retention. His company had won awards for workplace culture and responsible acquisition policies. Every interview I found emphasized his commitment to preserving the human elements that made acquired companies successful. If Derek was counting on Harrison to rubber stamp his version of events without investigation, he'd severely misjudged his audience. I began documenting everything I could remember: email timestamps, meeting notes, client communications, strategy, documents I'd created with original creation dates. If this was going to be a battle for credibility, I needed evidence that couldn't be dismissed or reframed. That evening, I was organizing my files when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. My computer showed recent login activity from an IP address I didn't recognize. Someone had been accessing my accounts remotely, and based on the timestamps, it had been happening for weeks. I checked my email sent folder and found messages I'd never written. Professional emails to female clients that contained subtly inappropriate comments about business dinners and suggestive language about partnership opportunities. The messages were crafted carefully enough to seem potentially innocent if taken individually, but together they painted a picture of someone crossing professional boundaries. Derek hadn't just been planning to frame me as incompetent. He'd been setting up a sexual harassment case that would destroy my reputation and eliminate any possibility of legal recourse. I stared at my computer screen, reading message after message that I'd supposedly sent but had never written. The emails were sophisticated in their subtlety, designed to look like someone gradually becoming more inappropriate in her communication with clients. References to enjoying drinks together a bit too much. Comments about looking forward to private meetings. Compliments about appearance that crossed professional lines. The sick genius of it was that Derek had used my actual writing style and knowledge of client relationships to make the messages believable. He'd referenced specific projects and inside jokes that only someone with access to my files could know. Any investigation would find these emails in my sent folder with my digital signature and password protection. I called Sarah Chen, an employment lawyer Patricia had recommended, and arranged an emergency consultation. Sarah's office was cramped but organized, law books stacked on every available surface and case files covering her desk in neat piles. This is more complex than typical workplace harassment, Sarah said after reviewing printouts of the forged emails. Proving these messages were created by someone else would require expensive digital forensics, potentially costing tens of thousands of dollars. Even then, if Derek was careful about how he accessed your accounts, the evidence might not be conclusive enough for court. What about the performance reviews, the false client complaints? She said, unless you can prove the complaints never existed. Companies have broad discretion in personnel decisions, especially during acquisitions. Your best option might be negotiating a severance package and moving on. I left Sarah's office feeling more trapped than ever. Derek had orchestrated this perfectly, knowing I couldn't afford a prolonged legal battle on a marketing director's salary. He'd created multiple narratives that would destroy me professionally while positioning himself as the responsible manager cleaning up a problematic employee. When I returned to Pinnacle the next morning, I discovered my access to key systems had been suspended. Temporary security update, the IT director Marcus Rodriguez explained apologetically when I called him. Marcus and I had worked together on numerous technology implementations, and his discomfort with the situation was obvious. Marcus, level with me. What's really going on? He looked around nervously before lowering his voice. Derek requested monitoring on your computer usage 3 weeks ago. Said there were concerns about data security. I had to install tracking software and provide daily reports of your activity. What kind of activity? Everything. Files accessed, emails sent, websites visited, even keystroke logs. Marcus paused. Shari, I know this is messed up, but I've got a family to feed. Derek made it clear that anyone who didn't cooperate with the security protocols would be considered a liability. I felt the walls closing in. Derek hadn't just been monitoring my work, he'd been watching my investigation in real time. He knew about my meeting with Patricia, my research into TechFlow, probably even my consultation with Sarah. I was playing chess against someone who could see all my moves before I made them. Over the next few days, my colleagues began treating me differently. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. People avoided eye contact in hallways. Lisa Thompson, my closest friend at Pinnacle and a senior account manager, finally pulled me aside during lunch break. Shari, I don't know how to tell you this, but Derek's been talking to people about you. He says you've been struggling with personal issues and that your behavior with clients has become unpredictable. What kind of behavior? Drinking too much at business functions, making inappropriate comments. He showed a few people some emails that were supposedly concerning. Lisa's voice dropped to a whisper. He said you might be having some kind of breakdown and that's why you're being transitioned out before the acquisition. I sat in my car in the parking garage that afternoon, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror and wondering if I should just give up. Derek had covered every angle, anticipated every move, and turned my own workplace against me. The smart thing would be to negotiate whatever severance I could get and start over somewhere else. But then I remembered my father's advice from when I was 12 years old and being bullied at school. Shari, he'd said, sometimes people think they can push you around because you're small or quiet or different, but you've got something they don't expect. You're smart and you're thorough and you never give up. Use those things. I thought about the business card I'd given Harrison, about the surprise in his eyes when he read it, about the careful way he'd pocketed it instead of dismissing it immediately. Derek wanted to play dirty, fine, but he had no idea who he was actually playing against. That evening, I discovered Derek had scheduled a meeting with Henderson Manufacturing for the following morning. According to his calendar, which I could still access through the shared company system, he planned to transition the client relationship and address concerns about account management continuity. He was going to use those forged emails to explain my sudden departure. Thomas Walker would be told that I'd been exhibiting inappropriate behavior and that Derek was stepping in to ensure professional standards. By the time I learned about it, Henderson would have already signed new paperwork establishing Derek as their primary contact. I made a decision that would either save my career or destroy it completely. I was going to that meeting uninvited, and I was going to reveal exactly who Derek was dealing with. I arrived at Henderson Manufacturing 40 minutes early, parking where I could see Derek's silver BMW when he pulled into the visitor lot. My hands were steady as I reviewed my notes one final time. Everything I'd built over the past 5 years came down to the next hour. Derek walked into this building at exactly 9:55, carrying his leather portfolio and wearing the confident smile I'd grown to hate. I waited 10 minutes before following him inside, giving him just enough time to begin his presentation before I disrupted it. Henderson's reception area hadn't changed since my first visit 3 years ago. The same photographs of their manufacturing facilities lined the walls, and the same receptionist, Gloria, greeted me with surprise. Shari, I wasn't expecting you today. Mr. Walker didn't mention you'd be joining the meeting. Last minute addition, I said, hoping my voice sounded more confident than I felt. Conference room B. That's right. They started about 10 minutes ago. I knocked once and entered without waiting for permission. Derek was standing at the head of the conference table mid sentence about streamlined communication protocols when he saw me. His face went through several expressions in rapid succession: surprise, anger, and something close to panic. Thomas Walker Henderson's CEO looked genuinely pleased to see me. Shari, what a nice surprise. Derek was just explaining some changes in account management structure. I'm sure he was, I said, taking an empty chair at the conference table. But before you sign anything, Thomas, there are some things you should know. Derek's voice turned sharp. Shari, this really isn't appropriate. We discussed your transition timeline. Actually, we didn't discuss anything. You announced my dismissal in front of 12 people without explanation or justification. I opened my briefcase and pulled out a folder. Thomas, you've known me for 3 years. Have I ever given you reason to question my professionalism or competence? Absolutely not. You've been exceptional to work with. Then you should know that everything Derek is about to tell you is fabricated. I placed my business card on the table in front of Thomas. Not the Pinnacle Solutions card I'd given Harrison, but my other business card, the one that told the whole truth. Thomas picked up the card and read it slowly. His eyebrows rose as he took in the information. Shari Williams, certified public accountant and licensed private investigator. Derek's face went pale. That's impossible. I've maintained both licenses since before I joined Pinnacle. I continued watching Derek's confident facade crumble. I worked in forensic accounting for 6 years before transitioning into marketing. The investigative skills never left me. Thomas leaned back in his chair, clearly fascinated. So when you joined Pinnacle, I was looking for a change from financial investigations. Marketing offered creative challenges I hadn't experienced before. But about 18 months ago, I noticed some discrepancies in Pinnacle's financial reporting that concerned me professionally. I kept my PI license active and began documenting irregularities. Derek stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. Shari's obviously having some kind of breakdown. Thomas, I think we should continue this meeting privately. Sit down, Derek. Thomas's voice carried new authority. I want to hear what Shari has discovered. I opened my folder and spread documents across the conference table. Bank statements, client payment records, expense reports, and email printouts organized in chronological order. Derek has been systematically inflating client satisfaction metrics and retention rates to increase Pinnacle's acquisition value. He's also been using forged emails and false performance reviews to eliminate employees who might expose his activities. These are private company documents, Derek protested. She had no right to access them. I had every right as a licensed investigator pursuing evidence of potential fraud. I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table. I've been recording our conversations for the past 2 weeks, Derek. It's legal in Arizona as long as one party consents. Thomas examined the bank statements while Derek sank back into his chair. These payment discrepancies you've highlighted, they show money being diverted from client accounts. Not diverted, inflated. Derek's been billing clients for services they didn't request and crediting the payments as evidence of increased account value. Small amounts, usually under $500, but across 43 clients over 6 months, it adds up to significant revenue inflation. I showed Thomas the email evidence next. Screenshots comparing the forged messages in my sent folder with IP logs showing they'd been created from Derek's computer. Digital timestamps that proved when my accounts had been accessed remotely. Password change records that I'd never authorized. Derek accessed my email accounts using company administrative privileges and created a pattern of inappropriate messages to female clients. His plan was to use these as justification for my dismissal, while simultaneously claiming credit for the client relationships I'd built. Thomas studied the evidence with growing anger. Some of these supposed emails from Shari are about private meetings I never had with her, dinner conversations that never happened. Derek made one last desperate attempt to regain control. Thomas, you can't seriously believe this conspiracy theory. Shari's been acting erratically for months. Even if she has these licenses, that doesn't mean. It means I know how to build an airtight case, I interrupted. And I've already contacted TechFlow's CEO with preliminary findings. Harrison asked for a complete report yesterday afternoon. Derek's face went white. You contacted Harrison. I told you I gave him my business card in that meeting. He called me 3 hours later. I gathered my documents back into the folder. Thomas, I recommend postponing any account transition discussions until the acquisition investigation is complete. Derek's activities may have compromised the integrity of the entire deal. Thomas Walker stood and extended his hand to me. Shari, I appreciate your honesty and your courage in bringing this forward. Henderson will definitely be waiting for the investigation results before making any changes to our account management. Derek remained silent as I packed my briefcase, but I could feel his fury radiating across the conference table. He'd underestimated me completely, assuming I was just another marketing employee he could manipulate and discard. As I reached the conference room door, I turned back one final time. Derek, you threatened to destroy my career with forged emails, but I've already traced them back to your computer using IP logging, metadata analysis, and keystroke pattern recognition. When federal investigators examine your hard drive, they'll find deleted files, browser history, and digital fingerprints that prove exactly when and how you accessed my accounts. The look of complete shock on his face told me everything I needed to know. Derek had never considered that his victim might have the technical skills to unravel his entire scheme. My phone rang as I was driving back to my apartment, Harrison's name appearing on the caller ID. I'd been expecting this call since leaving Henderson Manufacturing, but my heart still raced as I answered. Sherry, we need to talk immediately. Can you come to TechFlow this afternoon? Of course. What time works for you? 2 o'clock. Bring everything you've documented. We're going to need a comprehensive review. TechFlow Industries occupied a modern glass building in Tempe's technology corridor, all clean lines and environmentally conscious design. Harrison's assistant led me to a conference room where I found not just the CEO, but also TechFlow's legal team, chief financial officer, and head of human resources. Shari, thank you for coming, Harrison said, gesturing to an empty chair. Your preliminary findings have raised serious concerns about the integrity of our proposed acquisition. We need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. I spent the next 2 hours walking through every piece of evidence I'd gathered. Bank records showing Derek's systematic inflation of client billing. Email logs proving unauthorized access to my accounts. Performance reviews that contradicted documented client feedback. The legal team took detailed notes while the CFO analyzed financial discrepancies on her laptop. This pattern suggests fraud extending beyond personal gain, said Jennifer Walsh, TechFlow's chief counsel. If Derek artificially inflated Pinnacle's client retention and revenue numbers, he's potentially compromised the entire valuation model for this acquisition. Harrison leaned forward. What's Richard's involvement? Did he know about Derek's activities? That's complicated, I admitted. Some of Derek's actions required administrative access that Richard would have had to authorize, but other evidence suggests Derek was manipulating information presented to Richard just like he manipulated everything else. The CFO, Margaret Stevens, looked up from her laptop. I've been running preliminary calculations based on your documentation. If these billing discrepancies are accurate, Pinnacle's actual revenue is approximately 15% lower than reported. That's a difference of several $1 million in acquisition value. We're placing the acquisition on hold pending a complete investigation, Harrison announced. Jennifer, I want federal authorities contacted immediately. This appears to involve wire fraud, identity theft, and potentially securities fraud if Pinnacle's financial statements were knowingly falsified. As if summoned by our conversation, Harrison's assistant knocked on the conference room door. Mr. Harrison, Richard Pinnacle is here with his nephew and legal representation. They're requesting an immediate meeting about false allegations being made by a former employee. Harrison exchanged glances with his legal team. Send them to conference room A. We'll join them shortly. He turned to me. Shari, are you prepared for a direct confrontation? I've been preparing for this since Derek first tried to destroy my reputation. Conference room. A felt charged with tension when we entered. Richard sat at one end of the table looking haggard and confused. Derek was beside him, flanked by two lawyers in expensive suits. When Derek saw me, his expression hardened into pure hatred. Mr. Harrison, one of the lawyers began, our client has serious concerns about industrial espionage and corporate sabotage being conducted by this former employee. We demand that any illegally obtained information be excluded from your acquisition deliberations. Actually, Jennifer Walsh interrupted, federal investigators are already reviewing the evidence. This is no longer just an acquisition due diligence issue. Richard spoke for the first time, his voice strained. Harrison, I don't understand what's happening here. Derek told me Shari was having personal problems and needed to be transitioned out quietly. I trusted his assessment of employee management. I felt an unexpected pang of sympathy for Richard. His confusion seemed genuine, and I realized Derek had been manipulating his uncle just as systematically as he'd manipulated everyone else. Richard, I said gently, when did Derek first suggest I was having performance problems? About 3 months ago. He showed me client complaints and said you'd been missing deadlines. Did you ever speak directly to those clients about their concerns? Richard paused, thinking. No, Derek said he was handling it to minimize embarrassment for you. Harrison placed a folder on the table. We contacted Henderson Manufacturing and Coastal Dynamics this morning. Both companies expressed complete satisfaction with Shari's work and denied ever filing complaints. Thomas Walker specifically praised her professionalism and said she'd helped save his company over $200,000 through efficiency improvements. Derek's lawyer jumped in. Hearsay evidence isn't admissible. This isn't a courtroom yet, Harrison replied coolly, but it may become one soon. Jennifer Walsh opened her laptop and turned it toward the group. We've also analyzed the email evidence. Digital forensics show clear patterns of unauthorized access and message creation from Mr. Derek Pinnacle's company computer and personal devices. That's impossible, Derek said, speaking for the first time since we'd entered the room. I never accessed Shari's email accounts. Actually, you did, 47 times over 6 weeks. Jennifer clicked through screens showing IP addresses, timestamps, and access logs. You used administrative privileges to reset her passwords and created a pattern of inappropriate messages designed to support sexual harassment allegations. Federal computer fraud statutes cover exactly this type of activity. Richard stared at his nephew with growing horror. Derek, please tell me this isn't true. Derek's composure finally cracked. Uncle Richard, she's been trying to sabotage the acquisition from the beginning. You can't trust anything she says. She's jealous because I was promoted over her. Promoted to do what exactly? I asked. You've been at Pinnacle for 6 months. What specific accomplishments justified your VP position? The room fell silent as Derek struggled for an answer. Finally, one of his lawyers leaned over and whispered something in his ear. We're ending this meeting, the lawyer announced. Our client won't be answering any more questions without formal legal proceedings. Harrison stood slowly. That can be arranged. Federal investigators will want to examine all company computers' financial records and communications. In the meantime, TechFlow is withdrawing from acquisition negotiations indefinitely. Derek's face went ashen as the implications hit him. Not only had his scheme failed, but he'd triggered a federal investigation that would expose everything he'd done. As we were leaving conference room A, Richard approached me privately. Shari, I owe you an enormous apology. I trusted family over the employee who'd actually earned my trust. That was inexcusable. Richard Derek manipulated all of us. The important thing is that the truth comes out now. I want to make this right. What would it take for you to stay with Pinnacle through this transition? I considered his offer carefully. I appreciate that, Richard, but I think my future lies elsewhere. However, I'm willing to consult during the investigation to help sort out the legitimate business from Derek's manipulations. Harrison overheard our conversation and stepped closer. Actually, Shari TechFlow would like to offer you a position. We need someone with your combination of marketing expertise and investigative skills. Our director of due diligence role would be perfect for your background. For the first time in weeks, I felt genuinely optimistic about my professional future. Derek's attempt to destroy my career had instead opened doors I'd never imagined possible. But Derek wasn't finished fighting yet. As we left the building, he caught up with me in the parking lot, his lawyers nowhere in sight. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low and threatening. "You think you're so smart with your licenses and your evidence. But I still have those emails. I can release them publicly and destroy your reputation even if the investigation clears you." I smiled at him, genuinely amused by his desperation. "Derek, go ahead, release them. Digital forensics has already proven they're fabricated. Publishing fake emails as if they're real would add defamation and cybercrime charges to your existing legal problems." He stalked away without another word, finally understanding that he'd lost completely. The federal investigation moved quickly once agents began examining Pinnacle's digital infrastructure. I received a call from Agent Sarah Martinez of the FBI's Phoenix Cybercrime Unit requesting my cooperation as a witness and consultant. The Bureau had discovered evidence extending far beyond Derek's manipulation of my accounts. "Mr. Derek Pinnacle has been operating what appears to be a systematic fraud scheme," Agent Martinez explained during our meeting at the federal building downtown. "Your initial documentation provided the foundation for search warrants that uncovered significantly more evidence." "What kind of additional evidence?" "Credit card fraud for starters. He used company cards for personal expenses totaling over $30,000 while claiming business development justifications. Wire fraud for the falsified client billing. Identity theft for accessing your accounts and creating fraudulent communications." The scope of Derek's criminal activity shocked me. I'd known he was dishonest and manipulative, but I hadn't realized how extensively he'd been stealing from Pinnacle while sabotaging my career. "There's something else," Agent Martinez continued. "We found files on his personal laptop suggesting he'd been documenting Richard Pinnacle's business practices as potential leverage if his own activities were discovered. He was essentially building blackmail material against his own uncle." The calculation behind that revelation was breathtaking. Derek hadn't just been stealing money and destroying my reputation. He'd been preparing to destroy Richard too, if necessary, to protect himself. 3 days later, Derek was arrested at his apartment in Scottsdale. The news made local business publications with headlines about federal fraud charges against the nephew of a prominent local entrepreneur. Richard called me that afternoon, his voice broken with grief and embarrassment. "Shari, I keep trying to understand how I missed this completely. How could my own nephew betray not just you, but me, and everything I've built?" Richard, manipulation is Derek's skill. He identified what each person wanted to hear and told them exactly that. "You wanted to believe family could be trusted with business. I wanted to believe hard work and loyalty would be rewarded." He exploited both of our assumptions. The legal proceedings unfolded rapidly. Derek's lawyers attempted to negotiate a plea bargain by offering testimony about other companies engaged in similar acquisition fraud. The strategy backfired when investigators discovered Derek had no useful information about other crimes because his fraud had been purely personal enrichment rather than organized criminal activity. Meanwhile, Richard began the difficult process of cleaning up Derek's damage. He voluntarily opened Pinnacle's books to federal auditors, implemented new financial oversight procedures, and personally contacted every client Derek had manipulated to apologize and offer restitution where appropriate. "I want to rebuild this company the right way," Richard told me during a lunch meeting at a quiet restaurant near downtown Phoenix. "I've spoken with Harrison about restructuring the acquisition deal based on accurate financial information. TechFlow is willing to proceed, but at a price that reflects Pinnacle's actual value rather than Derek's inflated numbers." That sounds like the ethical approach. "There's something else. I'd like to offer you Derek's former VP position with a significant salary increase and equity stake in the combined company. You've earned the right to lead Pinnacle's strategic development." I considered his offer carefully. Working with Richard to rebuild Pinnacle's culture would be meaningful, but I'd already committed to exploring opportunities with TechFlow that excited me more than traditional marketing roles. "Richard, I appreciate the offer tremendously, but I think my future involves combining my investigative background with business operations in ways that a traditional VP role wouldn't allow. I understand, but would you consider consulting with us during the transition? Your knowledge of Derek's manipulations and client relationships would be invaluable. Absolutely. I want to help make sure the clients who trusted me aren't negatively affected by Derek's actions. Harrison contacted me the following week with an updated offer from TechFlow. We've been impressed not just with your investigative work, but with how you've handled this entire situation professionally and ethically. We'd like to create a new position specifically for your skills, Director of Forensic Operations for the combined company. What would that involve? Evaluating potential acquisitions for exactly the kind of fraud Derek perpetrated, implementing systems to prevent financial manipulation, working with our existing clients to ensure they're receiving the services they're paying for. It would combine your marketing expertise with your investigative background in ways most companies can't utilize. The role sounded perfect for my skills and interests. More importantly, it represented the kind of ethical business environment I wanted to work in rather than simply escaping from a toxic situation. Derek's sentencing hearing took place on a crisp morning in December. He received 18 months in federal prison plus restitution payments totaling $47,000 to Pinnacle Solutions and affected clients. His lawyers had argued for probation based on his youth and lack of prior criminal history, but the judge emphasized the systematic nature of his fraud and the breach of family trust. Mr. Pinnacle, the judge said during sentencing, you didn't steal money impulsively or out of desperation. You created an elaborate scheme to defraud your uncle's business, destroy a colleague's reputation, and manipulate a major acquisition deal. This level of calculated deception requires serious consequences. Derek looked smaller and younger in his orange jumpsuit, nothing like the confident manipulator who tried to destroy my career. I felt no satisfaction watching his downfall, only relief that his ability to harm others had been ended. Richard approached me after the hearing. Sherry, I know this can't undo what Derek put you through, but I want you to know how much I admire your integrity throughout this process. Lesser people would have sought revenge rather than justice. I learned something important about myself during this experience, I replied. I'm stronger and more resourceful than I realized. Derek intended to break my confidence and my career. Instead, he helped me discover capabilities I didn't know I had. The most surprising development came in February when I received a letter forwarded through the federal prison system. Derek had written to apologize and request forgiveness for what he'd done. The letter seemed genuine in its remorse, acknowledging the systematic nature of his betrayal and accepting full responsibility for the damage he'd caused. I decided to write back not to absolve him of consequences, but to offer the forgiveness he'd requested. Forgiveness, I'd learned, benefited the person giving it more than the person receiving it. I could let go of anger and resentment while still maintaining appropriate boundaries about future contact. 6 months after Derek's sentencing, I stood in my new office at TechFlow Pinnacle, overlooking the Salt River Valley, watching the Arizona sunset paint the desert mountains in shades of gold and crimson. My title, Director of Forensic Operations, represented something entirely new in corporate America, a position designed specifically to prevent the kind of systematic fraud Derek had perpetrated. The merged company had become something remarkable under Harrison and Richard's collaborative leadership. Richard's local business relationships combined with TechFlow's ethical framework and technological resources created opportunities neither company could have achieved independently. My role involved evaluating potential acquisitions for hidden financial problems, implementing transparency systems for client relationships, and training staff to recognize manipulation tactics. The work challenged me intellectually while giving me deep satisfaction. Every fraudulent scheme I uncovered, every honest business practice I helped establish, felt like a victory for integrity over manipulation. I'd found my professional calling by accident, but I embraced it completely. Derek had served 8 months of his sentence, earning early release through good behavior and participation in prison education programs. His letter to me from minimum security federal prison in Tucson expressed genuine remorse and detailed the counseling he'd received about narcissistic behavior patterns and ethical decision making. I'd written back once offering forgiveness while making clear that rebuilding trust would require years of demonstrated change. Forgiveness wasn't the same as forgetting or enabling future harmful behavior. Derek would need to prove through consistent actions that he'd genuinely changed rather than simply learned better manipulation techniques. Richard's transformation had been equally dramatic, but more positive. Therapy sessions helped him understand how his desire to trust family had blinded him to obvious warning signs about Derek's character. He'd become a passionate advocate for ethical business practices, speaking at industry conferences about the importance of systematic oversight and employee protection. I learned that good intentions aren't enough, Richard told me during our monthly review meeting. I created an environment where Derek could operate without accountability because I assumed family loyalty guaranteed ethical behavior. Now I understand that trust must be earned through consistent actions, not granted automatically based on relationships. My relationship with Harrison had evolved into genuine professional partnership. We'd collaborated on developing industry standards for acquisition transparency and employee rights during corporate transitions. TechFlow Pinnacle had become a model for responsible business growth, attracting both talented employees and ethical clients who valued integrity over short-term profits. Henderson Manufacturing had not only renewed their contract, but recommended our services to 3 other companies in their industry network. Thomas Walker frequently mentioned our integrity and reliability in business forums, crediting our ethical approach with saving his company hundreds of thousands of dollars through honest assessments of their operational needs. The most unexpected positive outcome involved my personal life. During Derek's trial, I'd met James Mitchell, a financial crimes investigator with the Arizona Attorney General's office, who'd been assigned to coordinate with federal authorities on the case. Our shared commitment to ethical business practices and investigative thoroughness had created natural professional respect that gradually developed into genuine friendship and eventually romantic partnership. James understood my work schedules and travel requirements because his job involved similar demands. More importantly, he appreciated my analytical thinking and problem-solving approach, rather than being intimidated by my professional capabilities. We'd been together 8 months now, taking time to build genuine trust and compatibility rather than rushing into emotional intensity. I love that your career involves preventing exactly the kind of corporate manipulation I investigate after it's already happened. James told me over dinner at our favorite restaurant in Old Town Scottsdale. You're protecting people before they become victims, rather than just helping them seek justice afterward. I'd begun speaking at business schools about corporate ethics and employee rights, sharing my experience to help young professionals recognize and respond to workplace manipulation. The presentations always generated intense discussion about moral decision-making and professional integrity. The most important lesson I learned, I told a group of MBA students at Arizona State University, is that your skills and your integrity are more valuable than any position or salary. Derek tried to destroy my reputation because he understood that credibility was my most important professional asset, but he underestimated my ability to prove my worth through documented evidence and ethical behavior. A student raised her hand. What advice would you give someone facing similar workplace betrayal? Document everything, seek help from trusted mentors, and remember that temporary setbacks don't define your ultimate success. Derek's betrayal felt devastating at the time, but it ultimately led me to discover capabilities I didn't know I possessed and opportunities I never would have pursued otherwise. Industry recognition followed naturally from our innovative work. TechFlow Pinnacle received awards for corporate transparency and ethical acquisition practices. I was invited to serve on advisory boards for professional organizations focused on business ethics and employee protection. The visibility helped establish our company as a leader in responsible business growth. My sister Jessica visited from California last month and marveled at the transformation in my life and career. You seem more confident and fulfilled than I've ever seen you, she observed during dinner at my apartment. It's like Derek's betrayal forced you to discover who you really are professionally. I think that's exactly what happened. I'd been limiting myself to traditional marketing roles because they felt safe and predictable. Derek's attack forced me to use all my skills and training to defend myself. I realized I was capable of much more than I'd been attempting. The ongoing challenge involved maintaining perspective about human nature and business relationships. Derek's systematic manipulation had taught me to be more careful about trusting people too quickly, but I didn't want cynicism to prevent me from building genuine professional partnerships with ethical colleagues. Richard and I had established a consultation agreement allowing me to advise Pinnacle on strategic decisions while maintaining my primary role at TechFlow. The arrangement benefited both companies while giving me flexibility to pursue investigative work that interested me most. The financial benefits had been substantial as well. My new salary plus equity participation in TechFlow Pinnacle's growth provided security I'd never experienced as a traditional employee. More importantly, I'd proven to myself that ethical behavior and professional competence created sustainable success rather than requiring compromise or manipulation. Last week, I received notification that Derek had been released from federal prison and was living in a halfway house in Phoenix while seeking employment. His probation officer contacted me as a courtesy, asking if I had concerns about potential contact or retaliation. I told her honestly that I felt no fear of Derek anymore. He'd lost the power to intimidate or manipulate me because I understood exactly how his techniques worked and had developed immunity to them. If anything, I hoped he'd genuinely learned from his experience and would make better choices moving forward. The ultimate lesson from my experience was that betrayal and injustice could become opportunities for growth and discovery when handled with patience, integrity, and strategic thinking. Derek had intended to destroy my career and reputation to advance his own interests. Instead, he'd inadvertently forced me to discover my true professional potential and create a more meaningful career than I'd ever imagined possible. Sometimes the most devastating betrayals lead to our greatest breakthroughs, but only when we refuse to compromise our values and trust in our own capabilities. What would you do if you discovered a colleague was systematically trying to destroy your reputation and career? Would you fight back through ethical means, or would you try to avoid confrontation and seek opportunities elsewhere? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help others find it. Subscribe to hear more stories about overcoming workplace challenges and professional betrayal. And don't forget to share this with anyone who might be facing similar workplace difficulties. Your support could help someone find the courage to stand up for themselves. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you recognize your own strength and worth in whatever professional challenges you might be facing. Remember that your integrity and competence are always your most valuable assets, and no one can take those away from you.